Today, we have the honor to have Miss Katie Sutton as our guest, and it is truly a pleasure and an honor. So, thank you for being here. So, first, let me introduce our honored guest, and then we'll go from there. So, Miss Katie Sutton is a physical therapy assistant with over 20 years of clinical and academic experience. She now serves as an assistant professor and director of clinical education at a PTA program where she specializes in professional development and clinical education. Her clinical experience is in outpatient orthopedics, but her passion has evolved into shaping the next generation of PTAs. A dedicated advocate for the service and professional growth, Katie volunteered extensively in both state and national levels, contributed numerous committees within Ohio chapter and APTA. Katie represents Ohio and the APTA Council and OPTA board members from 2022 to 2025, and one is serving APTA's PTA Council steering group. In 2025, she became the first PTA elected to serve the delegate of Ohio Physical Therapy Association. Outside of the classroom committee, Katie is a creator, producer, and a host of PTA Plus podcast, where she highlights PT and PTAs who elevate the profession and themselves beyond the job title. So, Katie, thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Uh, as am I, and it is truly a privilege and truly an honor to have you. So I know we've had many conversations before, but the most important part, and I think we'll just get things started with the first question: why is there so little research about the clinical reasoning and well as in ethics in the PT profession? So what I know we discussed the PT ethics document that just came out. So let's go into that head first.
Yeah, so I have my own theories in regards to why there's so little research on PTAs. I guess I should say that. When I was at CSM this year, I heard multiple times on at least three different topics: wellness for sure, wellness of PTAs, ethical conduct of PTAs, and clinical reasoning, which I know to be true because I'm very close to the clinical reasoning realm of PTA education. So I think what is happening is that we look to our academia or educators a lot for research to be done. In DPT schools, they have it built in. It's embedded in what they do as part of their clinical, or I'm sorry, as part of their scholarship, their faculty duties. However, that's not actually built into PTA education. So PTA educators can do research, and any PTA can do research. It's just that there isn't really a space dedicated for it. There isn't a whole lot of time dedicated to it. It's almost like it's an addition to what you already do as a faculty member. Now, I would encourage that anybody who has the extra time to look into it, I would even encourage our DPT counterparts that if there are certain things that they want to do research on, reach out to your local PTA programs because they're probably really excited to partner with you and help you. They just don't have the same resources and time allocation that our DPT counterparts do. And I think it's really important that we get this data because if we don't know what's happening with half of the people that serve in our profession and that work with our patients, if we don't know what's going on with them, then how do we know that we're getting real, true outcomes and that we can't make different improvements or changes in the future? So it's important that we get this data.
Absolutely, and having had the pleasure of actually teaching kinesiology in the PTA program, these are some of the most driven, well-educated students that will add immense value to our profession. But I think research, like trying to validate the data, is essential, right? So thank you for that. So let's
Yeah, of
jump
course.
right into the production ecosystem. So the PT PTA relationship is probably one of the most economically important relationships in our professional output. Most of the clinics and most of the practice providers have never truly structured this direct handoff point of delegating responsibilities for each discipline and each domain. So, what do you think can be done to better forecast the future delivery of care that better aligns with role-based responsibilities?
Well, I think the structure is an important part of that, right? So we tend to we're jumping into this relationship, and I say we. Typically, the physical therapist is kind of dumped into this relationship and may have never worked with a PTA. That was one of the things that I think I was the most floored about when I really started to get closer to um, education, PTA education, was that some of our PT students that were graduating never had the opportunity in their educational process to ever work with a PTA. So now CAPD standards have certainly changed, that there's more of an enforcement of this PT PTA relationship to happen through the educational process for our DPT students. But if you look at it from the swapped perspective of the PTA student, that PTA student is learning from day one that they're following a plan of care, that they're going to be supervised by a doctor of physical therapy or a master of physical therapy or bachelor of PT. So it's embedded in everything that we do as a PTA. We know our role to be an assistant to the PT. However, it's kind of like uh, getting married after the first date, right? So like we're asking PTs and PTAs to have this blooming relationship when they really don't know exactly what each other does. And I think that just by nature of the PTA having all of that delegation and supervision built into what they do every single day and every single lab and every single competency, all of that stuff's built in. But from the PT's perspective, they know that this other person exists and they know that they might work with them, but they don't always have that one-on-one opportunity to actually see it in action. I would encourage DPT programs that if they can, see if you can get your students in proximity to working with the PTA in their clinical experiences, even if it's just for a little bit. And that doesn't mean that it has to be every single clinical rotation, but getting them closer to that is going to help them understand that relationship. And then you can really start to dive into the roles. So if we can understand those roles of each other, I think that that's really going to give us that platform to leap from versus just kind of, jumping into it and hey, what do you do? And hey, what do you know? And that kind of thing.
Absolutely, right? So creating a structure, creating the right framework for optimal delivery of care. And I think that framework has to be guided by standards of practice, which most clinicians are not fully aware of the standards of practice. So I think this is probably the best time to describe what has changed in 2025 that actually expanded and extended the standards of practice for PTA community, and how does it impact a clinical provider right now in a clinical setting?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, Alex, everybody needs to know what's legal in their state, right? You really have to have a good grasp and a good understanding of what is in your Practice Act or Care Act. Um, y- it is your responsibility to know that. So if you are a PT working with PTAs, or if you are a physical therapist assistant, you need to understand and know your role and your scope from the perspective from a legal standpoint as well. And that's just something that I mean, I think that a lot of states are doing a little bit better job of trying to get some of that, like, jurisprudence stuff in every couple years. But if your state isn't making you do that, you need to get into that document and see what's going on. I can at least speak from Ohio. Anytime there's changes to the laws and rules in Ohio, we get a notification. Hey, there's a call for comments on different changes and whatnot. So you do have the opportunity to get into that document and look at it and understand it and really kind of dive in and see what's going on there from the standpoint of what we can and can't do. As far as what's happened in 2025, probably the biggest win was from a national level is that Medicare removed the rule where PTAs had to be in direct supervision, specifically in private practice. This rule was kind of antiquated and old, and it hovered over private practice for years and years, I think from like the mid 70s. I could be wrong on that date, but it was a long time. Um, that role had been in place. And it really it didn't make sense because, I would look at my, PTA colleagues that were working in home health, and they have a huge amount of autonomy. Yet in private practice, they were being held to this direct supervision, standard, and trying to explain that to PTA students or to anybody, I mean, they kinda looked at me like I had 2 heads, and I'm like, "Listen, I understand, but it was the rule," right? Like, you have to follow the rules. So that has now since been removed. I know a lot of states have made, some action to get it removed within their own Practice Act as well, and, I'm thinking of New York State in particular. Their direct supervision was removed in 2025 as well. So that is going to open the door, especially for our rural clinics, to be able to have a little more flexibility with that PTA really being an integral part of the PT PTA team.
Yeah, and knowledge is power because once you gain knowledge for your state practice act, you are able then to optimize even your own personal delivery of care, and there may be some better job satisfaction, right? So with that,
Absolutely.
right. Let's jump into the next point, which is like it's a little bit more of a pain point where we as a profession now is well documented fact we're not doing optimally well. There's a fair amount of attrition from professionals. There's a fair amount of burnout and dissatisfaction from clinical work. So, what would you suggest as a profession we can do that instead of applying band-aids we can actually start to rebuild a program, a professional program, both PT and PTAs, to build it better. How would we use technology and other forms of administrative care to optimize the delivery of care without just putting band-aids on?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the band-aids that we've been putting on systems and education for years and years and years. I mean, we could have an entire other webinar, Alex, about PTA education and how we've kept it contained in this 2-year process for, well, since the inception of the physical therapist assistant. That hasn't changed the 2 years associate's degree, yet we're still expected to meet, loads of standards from FSBPT, CAPD. From a clinical perspective, what is our clinics expecting versus what our, national standards are and things like that. So, yeah, we've been putting Band-Aids on, education for a long time. Now, as far as what we can do to kind of relieve some of that burnout, so you and I actually both are very familiar with an article that discusses physical therapy burnout. Interestingly enough, in that article, PTAs were not included. So,
Mhm.
if anybody wants to do a little more research on PTA wellness and burnout, that would be a great opportunity. But um, it was very clear that mentorship and self-efficacy mean a lot to physical therapy professionals, right? So, and I can say from my own work, I can say from the PTs and PTAs that I am in close proximity to, that I know that you're also in close proximity to, those people who stay close to mentorship, who offer it or receive it, do tend to be, um, I don't know if I want to say happier clinicians, but seem to have a higher job satisfaction rate. We're constantly pushing ourselves. We're constantly asking for the next question. It's kind of like these are the people that keep showing up, and we keep showing up, hopeful that there will be changes, and it might be slow changes, right? So the whole role of PTA direct supervision, it didn't happen overnight. That was years and years from the 70s till now for that rule to change, but people kept showing up. And our private practice owners were really some of the people who pushed that forward, very much so. So, getting yourself closer to those issues, it gives you a sense of being able to do something about it. And when you're thinking about self efficacy, if I have choices, if I know that there's a pathway, if I know that there's growth, that's going to keep me more satisfied. But if I know I'm coming into a role and this is my cap and that's as far as I'm ever going to go, I'm already kind of like, well, I guess that's it, right? If this is the top, then that's it. But when we can create those pathways where we have growth, I think that that's going to be very much so key to helping alleviate some of this burnout. Now, that being said, burnout can happen in any career. I think we get very focused on ourselves from time to time, but I always tell my students, I'm like, you can be burnout if you are a plumber, if you are a physician, if you're an attorney. Any of these things, you can get burnout on your career. It's what you choose to do to continue to evolve yourself and move yourself forward that makes the difference in your job satisfaction, in your career. I guess I should say career satisfaction versus job satisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is creating arbitrary ceilings on career growth because these arbitrary ceilings are based on retroactive functionality instead of raising the ceiling because you can just build another floor. And part of it is that, right? So, like, creating and designing clinical workflow that actually works around the professionals you have in your setting, and then optimizing that clinical workflow, optimizing each particular licensed clinician to do the best work that they can with the patients they have. So, what do you think this redesigned, cohesive clinical workflow looks like from the stakeholder alignment perspective?
Well, as far as redesigned. I think that we both know that we're getting closer and closer to technology that has the capabilities to make our life easier, right? Um, we have to make the choice as to whether or not we're going to choose and elect to use these things that can potentially make our life easier. And what I'm going to say about that is that if you're not implementing certain tech into um, your path, your career, your job pathway, your structure, whatever it is, whether it's clinically or from my own perspective educationally, if you're not using this tech, it's going to be bias really fast. We're going to have to dive into it. So, to me, getting near it, I was probably one of the last people you would think to use AI. I was like, absolutely not. It's going to take over my brain. So I mean, I literally said these kind of things to people. But now it's something that I build into my everyday in almost everything I do, from education to preparing for a podcast. There's so many things that it can do, and it takes things off of my plate that used to take me a long time. So I think that we have to get comfortable with getting closer to that type of technology. As far as other structural things, really knowing what each other is able to do and really good at doing. As far as um, from a clinical perspective, is it better to have PTA teams or not? You can have team based care, and these teams can just kind of specialize in certain areas, or you can have people who are very specialized in specific things, and then it's not necessarily a team either. So, getting to know each other and what each other's strengths are is vitally important. As a PTA, we're kind of like chameleons. At one point, I worked under the direction supervision of 4 PTs. Each one had a slightly different um, theory of practice, right? So I worked under one PT who insisted on doing all of the range of motion measurements and manual muscle testing themselves, which is totally fine. That's their prerogative. I worked with another PT who would actually take me on school based visits to help me do data collection because it made the process go faster. So there's these different, theories and perspectives. But as a physical therapist assistant, I had to be able to be adaptable to both of those theories of practice and be accepting of both of that. I knew my specific role with both of those physical therapists.
I think that the part of it is that, like, and that is a sign of a professionalism, Katie. That is someone who's able to maintain enough intellectual agility, to be able to work with different individuals, to be able to work under different direction, but to still apply top of license care to the patients. And I think that's what technology does. The technology like SPRY, who builds agents and agents are goal oriented, artificial intelligence driven tools. They're tools that are designed to optimize inefficiency and also optimize redundancy. And if you think about how much care we
Right.
provide, it's actually redundant paperwork, right? We always have this barrier, which, like, I personally can't stand when either me or my students or other clinicians always put a laptop in front of their patient, and it's patient laptop therapist. Uh, right, like, and it's incredibly inefficient. It just breaks any kind of intimacy because now you have a third party that stands in between us. It's a wall. So this technology gets rid of this wall because now it's me and the patient. It's just intimate. It's direct, and that's what tech does. Tech enhances and optimizes delivery of care, which without this form of technology, we're stuck 20 years ago. So I guess in a way, how do you see this technology and also the new freedom of practice will add to a larger sustainability of physical therapy as a profession into the future?
I mean, don't you think that this is only ultimately going to increase that therapeutic alliance? As you said, I love that term. It's going to build trust with our patients. I mean, we already know that we have issues with um, compliance as far as do the patients come back? Do the patients enjoy what they're getting, their product, right? Are we able to almost in some ways sell it to them appropriately and they want to come back? Are we keeping that trust? Is it eroding? I mean, anytime that we have delays in care, that only erodes more and more of that therapeutic alliance. And I would also kind of like to connect to that. the way that we're delivering care and the way that we speak about our team, right? The way that we present our team. There's a big difference between, Alex, if you're going to delegate care to me as your PTA and you explain to your patient, you're gonna be treated by my assistant the next time. Or if you say, Katie Sutton's going to treat you at your next session. She is an advanced proficient physical therapist assistant and orthopedic specialty, like that is going to frame that completely different for your patient. And that's the way that we should be speaking about everybody on our team is at the highest level. That's only going to optimize the care. Patient's going to have trust. We're decreasing the amount of time for the patient to be seen. We're keeping things going on the continuum of care. Anywhere we can integrate and inject technology into this process, we're moving that barrier, right? It only increases trust.
Absolutely, and I think that's trust is a perfect segue into the next question because I think if you look into the majority of audience of this specific webinar, they are either directly involved in running a physical therapy business or they own a physical therapy practice or multi-site physical therapy practice. So, what type of a cultural or operational shift do you think needs to be done for clinicians to start embracing the new freedom of practice and actually this what kind of a framework, what kind of patient education needs to be done for us to be able to deliver the care you just described, that a PT, PTA work as a team to optimize delivery of care. This is my responsibility. This is your responsibility. And together we're working to get you, the patient, better. So what do you think is the cultural shift that needs to be done?
Well, I think that I mean, I think that there's a lot of clinics who are already doing this very, very well. And I don't think that there's anything I can say to improve that because I think that when people have nailed this process down and they got it good, they have a good thing going. They're a model for other clinics, right? So there's probably not anything magical that I'm going to say today that's going to be able to make what they're doing necessarily better. But I think from a cultural perspective, um, understanding that we're all kind of on the same playing field now. As far as education goes, there's definitely vast differences, right? But we know that the associate's degree is jam packed full. You and I have both been very close to that, and we see how much our PTA students are learning in order to be prepared to work under a doctor of physical therapy now. So the educational standards are coming um, very high for the PTA. I mean, there's even arguments for that to be moved to a bachelor's degree or have a multi entry into physical therapy because of how much information's in there. From a leadership perspective, from an association perspective, PTAs have made a lot of groundwork. A lot of ground has been gained there. PTAs are serving at very high levels. PTAs are involved in a lot of conversations that are happening at a national level. We're finally included in our code of ethics for the profession. That was a huge step forward for our profession. So I think that we are ready. We are ready to kind of step into that next realm of what does the future look like, So you and I both have had conversations about the future of physical therapy. We've been in rooms with people who've had conversations about the future of physical therapy. We have to learn to adapt to what's coming and embrace these changes. It's only going to improve our outcomes for ourselves, for our patients, and those around us. I mean, lots of exciting things are happening.
Absolutely. I think it is a good time to be a clinician, and I'm immensely optimistic about the future of our profession because we have so much opportunity to get higher level agency and autonomy in a larger healthcare systems. We can function as primary care providers. We can do so many more things in a U.S. based healthcare system that's already overly stressed.
Yeah.
But because the system is stressed, I think and that actually leads us to a poll. Right now, if you scan this QR code, you will be able to cast your vote in this poll. But the reason for this poll question, and we only included one, it's to highlight the communication. I think a lot of times in a busy clinic where you have a lot of providers running and doing their best work with multiple patients, and the patient volume is going up. What is the best optimal way to enhance communication, and how can technology can help you enhance this communication between different providers, but also providers and patients?
Are you asking me that question, Alex?
Right? You and the audience. So the question
Oh,
here
okay.
is
All right.
awkward signaling between the PTAs and PTs, right? So like there needs to be a transfer of information between a clinicians working on the same case. And right now that transfer of information is always suboptimal because if you leave a node in the EMR system, the node just stays,
Mhm.
especially these old first generation EMR systems that are so difficult to navigate that these nodes, like if you want something to be known to the rest of the clinical community, that node will take minutes, if not dozens of minutes, to extract. So, what do you think is an optimal way to enhance communication? And in a way, it's a plug for the system that like has designed these AI agents that improve communication, right? So, what do you think is the best communication? And I'll read out what our audience actually says about this too. So, Katie.
Yeah, I think, Alex, that these things need to be built into systems within clinics. So if you're a clinic that is utilizing physical therapist assistant and aides, I think you have to have those clear structures and boundaries outlined as to what's going to happen within your own clinic, right? Is that a weekly team-based kind of meeting where we're catching this information? I am certain that there are AI systems that can pick up details in these types of minutes that can create structure for the department to move forward, right? I think that um, that's the interesting thing about technology is we forget how many of these little tiny details that it could potentially pick up on and give us a load of information to move forward in the clinic, right? I was kind of raised on the old school system of physical therapy where we would have, afternoon debates during lunch about what's going on and about different diagnosis and different treatments and things like that. And I miss those kind of fiery conversations, right? That's where you learn a lot from your coworkers, and you kind of really learn those things again. What are you good at? Who should be leading certain initiatives in the clinic, right? If you know what each other's good at, a PTA doesn't always have to be just providing care. They could be leading different initiatives in your clinic.
It absolutely right. So it is so true, and it's actually a very interesting observation. So I've had already couple of decades in this profession, and so there were clinics that I was a part of that had a typical physical therapy open floor plan, right? Like it's a gym based setting. You have a couple of plinths, and then you have just people communicate. I have also seen more recently a shift towards more of a segregated care delivery, especially in a cash only clinics or in these more specialty services clinics where you have different rooms, you have much more sterile clinical approach. But I think once you erect walls between a clinical care provider, that kills communication too. And so the delegation of care, understanding how like bouncing ideas of each other tends to subside and tends to die with erection of walls. So
Yeah.
how do we go around it? How do we then use this technology to still enhance this communication? Do we use then digital tools like the one we're communicating in right now, where we're still talking even though we're a couple hundred miles away, right? What do you think is like the best way to encourage that the continuation of this communication, even if you are in a more of a segregated clinical setting?
Well, I think it all comes back to intentionality, right? You and I made this webinar happen because we both agreed to make it happen and we were intentional and there were steps to make sure that these things happen, right? So if you want that good rich communication, those high level conversations about what's happening, what's working, what's not working, are your patients getting better? What are your outcomes? How long is it taking you to do prior authorizations and clinical documentation and things like that? If you can make it intentional, I think that that's only going to help the clinic bloom and blossom into something better and better. But if these are, again, those hallway conversations where we're like, hey, we definitely should catch up on that, that's just going to roll off and it's not going to happen. So intentionality is everything, Same thing with going to the gym, right? If you want a
Hmm.
good physique, you still have to show up to the gym, right? If you want good communication, you have to make sure you're showing up for that conversation. And you have to make sure that you're um, carving out time, and I'm sure that that's the last thing that any clinic owner wants to hear is, "I need to carve out more time for something else." And that's why using technology can help improve that for them so it doesn't feel like such a chore.
Mhm. And, like, it's like using the services and using the resources that are at your disposal. And then as a administrator, if you're looking to make an investment into technology, invest in technology that actually optimizes the delivery of care, optimizes communication and everything else that is involved in this group-based, team-based approach to clinical care delivery. So let's discuss this particular study. I think this one is really important because a PTA dynamic and PTA utilization as a source of optimal care delivery process. And this was a survey of physical therapy assistants that responded to their career satisfaction, I guess. And what are some of the best ways to improve utilization parameters and to enhance clinicians and then private practice owners to onboard PTAs, but also to help PTAs thrive in their professional development. Uh, like what are some of the tools that are you've seen work, and what are some of the tools you would suggest for the private practice owners to implement?
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't surprise me. I think, again, we have not traditionally had good pathways and career development established for PTAs. I think we're getting better at that, Alex. I think we're getting closer to that. I'm a big fan, a big proponent of APTA's advanced proficiency pathways for physical therapist assistants. If there's any clinic owners that are listening in today that works closely with PTAs, one of the reasons why I am a fan of this particular pathway for PTAs is because it enforces and really, encourages and fosters that PT-PTA relationship because the physical therapist assistant cannot complete the pathway without having integration of the PT. They have to have a PT sign off and spend time with them in order to make sure that they are actually proficient through these different. There's a lot. There's orthopedics, there's neuro, there's geriatrics, there's acute care. There's a bunch. I can't remember how many, and they're coming out with more. So it's not just the PTA going out on their own and learning about this and not having any communication. They have to have that. Clinical partnership with a physical therapist. So I think it really kind of helps foster that environment. So that's one of the things that I think is really helpful if you are not a fan of those pathways or if it's not something that you want to embed into your practice, if there is some kind of clinical pathway, I mean, PTAs can become certified in lymphedema and pelvic health and aquatics. Most of them just require that their physical therapist is also proficient in those things as well. I think that one of the things that we found to be most successful in the most recent clinic that I had worked in outpatient was taking out time every year to do a true evaluation. So I had my, yearly evaluation as an employee, but we would sketch out different manual techniques that I wanted to learn in the next couple of months or that I could be taught. And so those were things that were taught to me. And then I was checked off as proficient whenever I was proficient in those. And then I was able to be entrusted to do and perform certain techniques. So again, time had to be carved out, but also the PTs that I worked with knew exactly what I was capable of doing. They knew the certifications that I held, they knew the training that I had, they knew what I was able to do, and that made things much more simple. And sometimes it's a matter of I can start treatment and then I might have to pass that treatment off to the PT so that they can perform a certain skill or technique that I'm not trained in or capable or allowed to do per our practice act. So these are things that you kind of have to have embedded in the whole entire process from the beginning. Try not to just throw them in, have a plan, right? Hope is not a plan. So I hope that this works is not always what the best solution for that. But if you can kind of etch out these things in advance, and again, the value of knowing each other's skills is so valuable. A PT is not going to delegate something to me if they know that's not something that I'm trained to do. I mean, that would only de optimize or devalue patient care.
Yeah, and I think having a process, right? So, like what you described is perfectly aligned with that's a process. Once a year, you have a direct touch point, but then you have smaller touch points. So, as an academic, how do you coach students then, and people who are about to enter the field? How do you coach students to gain to perform agency in this process of developing structured mentorship, structured communication with PTs? What are some of the ways you administer your students through the part of academia?
Sometimes I think they get tired of hearing me talk about all of the different things that are available to them at their fingertips. I tend to give them real life examples. Um, I've had a lot of opportunity in my career to grow because I sought that opportunity out, because I surrounded myself with people who were also moving in the direction that I want to go in. So I tend to remind students that yeah, anybody can become stagnant, but anybody can also not become stagnant. You've got to be again very intentional. If I want to get closer to working in pediatrics, if I want to get closer to working in a pelvic health space, I have to get myself in proximity to those specific CEUs and to the people who are already working in those spaces. So that might look like me going and volunteering a half day at a pediatric clinic or spending some time with some PTs and PTAs who already work in those spaces, but I gotta get myself closer to it so I can make sure I'm a good fit for that. But anybody can, go out into the field and just practice day to day and be happy with the bare minimum standard. And this is what I got to do to get by, every day. Anybody can fall into that kind of a rut. It's not in my personality. So
Yeah,
um, I think I show that to my students pretty well. And some of the things that I talk to my students about is how far we've come. Again, we've talked about a lot of the strides that have been made in the last few years for PTAs as far as leadership realms and, of course, supervision standards changing and things like that. But I'd like to remind them that they're going to graduate and they're going to come into a profession where the sky is the limit for them. Other than their legal standards that they have to stay within, there's so many things that they can do. I know at least I could probably count 5 PTA co-owners off the top of my head that I'm, close friends with that PTA team, but they are co-owners of their own facility. So, that's something that is definitely within reach for physical therapist assistants. So again, it's all about getting yourself close to the thing that you want to be able to do, and then can you get paid for that thing, right?
yeah. Well, absolutely, and I think that's the can you get paid for it is a perfect summary of this current slide, which is optimal and suboptimal efficiency standards, and how a lot of these redundancies and inefficiencies actually cannibalize our time as clinicians. Now, and so this is more of a personal passion, but working in a health technology sector and working with a organization like SPRY, who is trying to design systems to optimize delivery of care through these top of the line technology solutions. How do you convince clinicians, the actual practice owners, whether they're PTs or PTAs, to actually reevaluate their current tech stack, especially if they have not invested in new technology in the last decade, and start to appreciate that the modern technology is not just factor of 5 better than a previous technology. It's a factor of 5,000 times better. And so do you think are some of the best ways to be the agents of change for these more rigid private practice owners that have not made that shift to the new technology?
Well, I think that the bottom line is going to show that at some point in time. I think it's so interesting. I think of all the students that I place into different clinical experiences, and I think I have one clinic that still does handwritten notes somewhere in the system. And, I wonder what's going to happen in the future to those clinics that maybe just don't have the forward thinking of to step into those kind of spaces. I want them to be successful. They're good PTs and PTAs that work in these systems, they're smart people. So I want them to be successful and I want their businesses to be successful in the long term. I think that they're going to see that in the bottom line, what's coming back to them, what utilizing technology and your staff, whether that's physical therapist assistants or techs, to the best ability that you can, is going to give you a return on investment that, yeah, I mean, that's only going to help continue to grow your clinic, right? If that's what you want, if that's what clinicians want is to continue to grow.
Well, I think we're so like, as an industry, we're so used of actually losing money and losing revenue. Like we're so used of having 20% attrition of our reimbursement that we're almost desensitized that to see that we're incredibly inefficient. If you buy a soda bottle and 20% of it leaks out before you actually drink it, sooner or later you're going to start to try to get a different bottle or not buy from that manufacturer anymore. But in terms of delivery of care, we're incredibly inefficient, so that we're at peace with
Mm.
losing averaging resources. And I think it doesn't have to be this way. So, and that's actually kind of to build on this on the next slide. How being an academic again, Katie, how do you coach students that are emerging and entering a workforce to actually be the leaders in technology adoption in a clinical setting? So you are a newly graduated PTA, but you're also a PTA that's a digital digital native. You have grown up with technology. You were born into your iPad. You have used your phone since you were 3, right? You have been, and then you start to work for a private practice owner who is not a digital native. Your private practice owner did not grow up with technology, had to adapt. So he's a digital convert. He or she is a digital convert because it's still not organic to them. So how do you convince clinicians, new entrant clinicians, to become leaders in technology adoption, because they're the ones that are going to have to show and a lot of times teach older clinicians that don't have the same refinement or technology that how to use it. So what do you think is the best way to get these students to take leadership in that role?
I think it's a great question. And honestly, I'm kind of excited to see where this goes because you're spot on. The students that I'm teaching now are digital natives. Like I was not, So there's going to be a moment coming up real soon where they're going to be AI natives too. So
Mhm.
this stuff isn't going to be new to them. It's going to be, and they're going to expect that. So there are currently conversations happening, at least from where I'm at in Ohio in regards to how AI is going to be integrated into curriculum from a college perspective, a university perspective, all the way down through your curriculum standards from programs down, how that's going to be integrated. And we do have to embrace it. And I kind of hope, and hope isn't a strategy, but
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful that our students are gonna be the leaders in this because they're gonna come into clinics and say, "You know what? This doesn't make sense. This isn't good enough for what we can do. We can do better." And I'm hoping that they are the ones that can kind of push forward and say, Our patients deserve better. They deserve more of our time. There's easier ways to do this." 90% of the time, when I send my students to clinical experiences, and this may sound very antiquated here, but I don't teach any kind of electronic documentation. I teach students to gather data from a SOAP perspective. What is a subjective objective assessment plan? Because that information they do need to know. They need to know how to collect that data and that information. However, these students are so good with technology, it's never a problem for them to learn a new EMR system. They'll learn 2 or 3 different EMR systems in their clinical experiences and never once bat an eye. It's not, it's never a problem anymore. Now, 10, 15 years ago, technology was sometimes a little bit of an issue if it was maybe somebody who's coming back second career and they're like, I just didn't use a computer a lot in my first career. But now I would say the majority of the time, the students are the ones who are like, hey, there's a shortcut in here that we can use. And their CI is super excited because they're like, your student taught me all of this
Mhm.
interesting stuff about our EMR system, right? So my hope would be that students would look at the profession and say, this isn't good enough. We can do better, and that's what spurs us on, right? Is,
Yeah.
this new fresh set of PTs and PTs that come into the profession and say, we have ideas and we can do better. And those are the people that we need to kind of step up and take over eventually some of these leadership roles.
Absolutely, right. They're the ones that we're almost passing the entire organization to the next generation of clinicians and professionals. So as we pass it along, we have to leave the profession in a better state than we took it. And one of the ways to do that is this is a really interesting study that shows that PT PTA dynamic and what happens to an organization that has creates a process and restructures the delivery of care that optimally has a direct role responsibility. Like, and that's like there's winning across the board in terms of delivery of care and optimal care, the processes and clinical outcomes. Uh, but I think the caveat here is if you look into our workforce is under stress in a physical therapy world. Right? So we have 10% attrition. We don't have enough clinicians to fit roles. If you look into that actual future of the profession, physical therapy assistant programs are increasing new graduate volume by like 19% year after year, versus PT programs are only drawing 6 to 8% increase in volume. So in the next 5 to 10 years, you're just going to have more physical therapy assistants in a market working in a clinical settings versus PTs. So again, this may be redundant to some of the previous questions, but what do we have to do to optimize PTAs to be accepted as foundational level clinical care providers in an outpatient setting?
I love this question. Um, and there's so many different ways that we could go with this, Alex. So, yes, these shifts are definitely happening. We know that there is a PT shortage coming. This has been published. This is information that's out there. We do realize that we're reaching a point where we're going to have to do something about this, right? So, back to the whole putting a band aid on something. I would argue that that percentage of PTAs that are coming into the profession maybe really want to be a physical therapist, but there could have been barriers in the way. Are there ways that we can reduce the barriers for physical therapist assistants to become DPTs at some point in time? What does that look like? Well, I mean, there's probably 1,000 different ways that we could take care of this, right? I talked to you a little bit about, is there a way for us to take the associate's degree to a bachelor's degree, get them a little bit closer, get them somewhat more prepared for DPT school? There are some bachelor degree PTA programs. They're non accredited through CAPTE, but they do exist, and sometimes that is a nice launching point for a PTA to take the next step. Um, I interview people on my podcast that talk about bridge programs and what that looks like. Now, there's people who could argue that bridge programs aren't true bridge programs, and there's still a lot of barriers for PTAs to get there. But I would really like for us to find a way um, to really get PTAs closer to crossing the finish line as DPTs. I don't think that every PTA wants to be a physical therapist, myself included. I love being a physical therapist assistant. This is my career. This is what I chose to do. It has served me very, very well. But there are a percentage of PTAs who would love to be DPTs and honestly probably have decades of experience that could take us into that. So, what does that look like? Are there scholarships available to get them across the finish line? If we can reduce those barriers any way we can, that's going to help fill some of that sustainability gap that we have going on.
Yeah. So one of the brightest, best young clinicians that I've worked with recently is Jonathan Smith in Alabama. So he's deeply involved in Alabama Physical Therapy Association. He's a PTA to DPT transition individual. He is not only incredibly intelligent and incredibly driven, but he is a change maker in his state. He's actually trying to create Alabama as a one of the foundational states in a lot of the APTA measures. So I think having even that origin of like through the PTA and then having that bridge system that allows you to understand both sides is great. So and then that's your real world example, right? But let's just discuss one more time about a structure or at least an operational roadmap for a process or for a care provider that is looking to optimize this delivery of care. So, would you recommend, or would you be opposed to someone having this 5 part process of onboarding a PTA into your practice? Do you suggest expanding it, or do you suggest just kind of ho- hoping for the best as as a way to optimally create this efficient clinical ecosystem?
I'm a big fan of hitting the start button because I think that you can always make adjustments and assess along the way. And I mean, that's what we do as clinicians. That's what we do as educational professionals. We have to hit the start button somewhere, right? If you have a pathway and in a year from now it's not working, stop and reassess. Speak to the PTAs that are on your team. Is this working? Is this not working? And then reassess and make readjustments from there. I think that that's the only way to go. But if you have nothing, then again, you're kind of flying on that. I hope this works. I'm thinking about bringing PTAs into my clinic for the first time, and I hope everything goes okay. But if you have an operational roadmap such as what you have put up on the screen here right now, it's something, right? It's better than
Hmm.
nothing. Mhm. So, yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah. So I think it really is a incredibly important, I think, to have a process. It is incredibly important to have a structure and a path. And it's really important to reevaluate yourself, to create feedback loops about your business operation. I think if you have been providing care, and if you owned your practice, or if you've been delivering care for over a decade and you haven't reassessed your process, at least annually, you're probably not creating optimized care delivery system, because the systems require analysis and require feedback loops. So I think what you said is really informative and really good. Um, and this is more or less to align with this, but what would you say is an optimal career ladder for a physical therapy assistant that enters a workforce, like, who graduates or who just graduated? What do you see that 5, 10, 15 year projection as an optimal roadmap?
I think it's gonna look different, excuse me, for every clinic, excuse me, who is, bringing PTAs into their system. I think that this could look vastly different. I think that we tend to see PTAs maybe burn out or want to leave the profession, not necessarily because they didn't like what they did, but maybe because they were hungry for growth. So if we can kind of build that into the system, and I think of this is one of those things that I tend to talk to students about when they're going out for their job interviews, right? When they're getting ready to take their first job. What does education look like to the facility that you're trying to get a job with? Do they value that? Do they provide it in-house? Are there pathways to learn? Are there ways that they're building in these, clinician retreats, these skill checkoffs where they're going to teach you new skills? Is there a pathway built for you to continue to grow? That's important in any job, in any role, in any career. We need to know that there's a way for us to grow.
Yeah, and growth is important. Growth is also something that needs to be facilitated, right? Like, sometimes you need to add
Mhm.
energy to facilitate growth. Uh, then the same question, and this is off script, but what is your projection for our industry for the next 5, 10, 15 years? How do you see our industry growing and taking over some of the other healthcare domains and providing exemplary care?
Well, I think we're getting to the point where we're looking a little bit more external. I think for a long time we looked very internally. We recognized and noticed that there were things that we do really well, and there's things that we could definitely improve upon. But if we look at other professions, and if we look at the U.S. and as a whole, right, the U.S. is really kind of the model for having assistants built into their healthcare system. So you're rarely going to find a physical therapist assistant outside of the US. There might be a few places that are doing something very similar, maybe not licensed or have the knowledge base as a PTA. But I think we're finally kind of starting to look outside of our own space and look at other professions and say, you know what, they really model this assistant role very well. And maybe not looking to ourselves for all of the answers, but looking to other places where we can find creative ideas and solutions. So I'm excited for the next 5 years. I think that physical therapy is growing. We know that we're needed. I don't think that there's anybody that's going to push us off the map. I don't think AI is not going to take our role. We're definitely needed, and we know that. So, what is it that we're going to do to make our systems, our workflows, our processes simpler so that we can retain the PTs and PTAs that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. Just transitioning to the next generation with maximal workforce, but also optimized workforce. So
Mm.
we only have a few minutes left, and I will open the floor for questions. But I want to thank you personally for being available for this, but also for everything you do in the form of leadership, for your APTA involvement, for your Ohio State involvement, and beyond, for being a voice of the organization of the profession that is very clear and very objective, and it really is a change maker. So thank you, Katie, for being this change maker.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Alex. Appreciate it.
How would people be able to find you if they want to follow you? How would they be able to find your PTA podcast and everything beyond?
Yeah, so PTA Plus lives on Instagram is probably where I'm the most active. PTA Plus also lives on Facebook, less active there, but I do try. I'm also on LinkedIn, personally on LinkedIn is Katie Sutton. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have not brought it into TikTok yet, not officially anyways. You can also
Mm.
find PTA Plus on YouTube, so all of my episodes do end up on YouTube as well, so you can find it anywhere where podcasts are available, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, all of those places.
And I strongly encourage everyone in the audience to follow Katie and follow her podcast and go beyond. So I am really grateful for this. I'm grateful for your time. And just to show you that we like y- y- we will have Jerry Durham who will follow up in a podcast for or in a webinar for June. But I think there's in our entire 380,000 strong workforce between PTs and PTAs. There's probably a handful of individuals like yourself, Katie, that are really being the voices of change and the voices of reason and the voices for of the organization. So Jerry being another voice, but you have been so vocal about this, and again, grateful for your leadership, but also grateful for your time to be here because I hope people who attend this webinar will not just leave this, but will also use resources that we shared and use your guidance and find you to continue to build this profession. So thank you for that.
Of course, thanks.
And I think we have potentially one question. So here's a question. I was trying to read the slide quickly, but we're showing data and support PTA's team supporting the increased visits in the episode. So yeah, this is an interesting question, and always gets a rise out of people that an effective utilization of PTs and PTAs doesn't always maximize in the number of visits per script. It actually improves visit efficiency. So is there anything you want to say to that?
No, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with that. Adding a PTA to your clinic isn't gonna, like, magically, like, create this secret sauce to like winning everything, right? But it is going to add to your efficiency. And we know that having PTAs on your team does not decrease clinical care. Your patients are still getting excellent patient care and they're still getting better. Now, I think that there are possibilities for PTAs to add to that bottom line. I mean, if you think of the salary differences between PT and PTA and what PTAs can charge and bill for, you're likely going to see a positive outcome, a positive uptick with your revenue. But I'm not so sure that I would say that it's going to be like the solution to solve all of your clinical problems.
Yeah, yeah, but you will definitely solve your quality problems. So because
Absolutely, yeah.
so thank you again, Katie. Thank you for the audience for attending. And once again, please find Katie on her Medium and let's continue the lead.